After I lived Ophelia's fate, I finally found Jesus. I'm standing in a federal prison cell at 3:47 in the morning, staring at a metal sink I filled with cold water. Floating on the surface are 11 flowers I made from torn Bible pages, rosemary and pansies and violets folded from the book of Psalms. My reflection stares back at me from that dark water, but it's not my face anymore. It's hers. Ophelia, the girl from Hamlet who lost everything, went mad, and drowned surrounded by flowers and broken songs. And I realize in this moment, I'm not just reading about her. I am her. The madness, the isolation, the water, the flowers, the disconnected words I've been muttering to myself for weeks. And as I lean forward, face inches from that cold surface, ready to submerge one final time, I see him, Jesus, standing behind Ophelia's reflection. And what he showed me in the next 90 seconds didn't just save my life. It showed me why I needed to live Ophelia's fate, to finally die to the old Diddy, and resurrect as who I was always meant to be. But let me back up. September 2024, the last days before everything collapsed. I was in my Miami mansion, surrounded by lawyers in $1,000 suits, but I'd never felt more alone in my life. The digital world canceled me in 48 hours. Brands I'd built relationships with for decades cut contracts overnight. Friends who'd been at my parties every weekend stopped responding to texts. But the worst message came from my daughter Chance. 5 words on my phone screen at 2 a.m. I can't offend you anymore, Dad. I stared at those words until the screen went black. That's when I knew. No amount of money, no PR team, no legal strategy was going to fix this. The world had decided who I was, and there was nothing I could do about it. September 16th. Federal agents arrested me. I won't go into the details of the charges. You can Google that. But what you can't Google is what happens to a man's mind when the one thing he built his entire identity on, power, gets stripped away in handcuffs. I'd spent 54 years building an empire on control. I controlled the music, the brands, the narrative, the rooms I walked into. And now I couldn't control whether I got an extra blanket at night. They put me in administrative segregation. 23 hours a day in an 8x10 cell. 1 hour in a concrete rec yard by myself. No phone calls. No visitors for the first 2 weeks. Just me, 4 walls, and the loudest silence I'd ever heard. The first 2 weeks, I kept the facade up. I did push-ups, sit-ups, pace the cell, memorized legal strategies my attorneys were sending in letters. I refused the psychiatric medication the prison doctor offered. I'm Sean Combs. I don't break. But every night, lying on that thin mattress bolted to concrete, I felt something inside me starting to crack. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, like ice breaking on a frozen lake. You don't hear it until you're already falling through. October 10th, exactly 1 year ago today, a correctional officer named Bennett was doing evening rounds. He stopped at my cell, slid something through the food slot. A book, old, spine cracked, pages yellowed. Hamlet by William Shakespeare. I looked at him confused. I didn't request any books. He shrugged and said, "Wrong cell. Probably. Keep it. Nobody reads that stuff anyway." And he walked away. I picked it up, held it. The weight of it felt significant somehow, though I couldn't tell you why. That night, I couldn't sleep. Insomnia had become my reality. At 1 a.m., I opened the book to a random page. Act 4, Scene 7. The Queen is describing Ophelia's death. There's a willow grows aslant a brook that shows as hoar leaves in the glassy stream. There were fantastic garlands did she come of crowflowers, nettles, daisies, and long purples. Her clothes spread wide, and mermaid-like. A while they bore her up, but long it could not be till that her garments, heavy with their drink, pulled the poor wretch from her melodious lay to muddy death. I read it 3 times. Then 5, then 10. Something about Ophelia's death gripped me in a way I can't fully explain. She didn't just die. She drowned slowly, singing songs, surrounded by beauty, completely disconnected from the horror of what was happening. And I thought, that's me. That's what's happening to me right now. I'm drowning, But I'm so disconnected from reality that I'm still trying to sing, still trying to pretend the water isn't rising. Over the next week, I became obsessed with Ophelia. I read her scenes over and over. The part where her father dies and she loses her mind. Where Hamlet, the man she loved, rejects her brutally. Where she hands out flowers to people at court, each one symbolic. Each one a piece of her fragmenting psyche. There's rosemary, that's for remembrance. Pray, love, remember. And there's pansies, that's for thoughts. I memorized those lines. And then I started doing something I can't explain rationally. I started making flowers. There was a Bible in my cell, the kind every prison provides. Standard issue leather cover, thin pages. Nobody reads them. They just sit there on the metal shelf, collecting dust. I started tearing out pages. Carefully, psalms mostly. I'd fold them into shapes. Roses, lilies, daisies. I learned how from a book I read once. Or maybe I just invented it. I don't know. I'd line them up on the narrow windowsill of my cell. 11 flowers. One for each month. I thought I'd be here before trial. The correctional officers noticed. They didn't say anything at first. But after a few days, the prison psychologist, Dr. Ellen Voss, came to my cell. She asked me why I was making paper flowers. I looked at her and said, without thinking, Ophelia had flowers. I need flowers too. Her face changed. She wrote something on her clipboard. 2 days later, they moved me to Suicide Watch. Suicide Watch is its own kind of hell. They take everything from you. No sheets, no books, no Bible, which meant no more pages for flowers. They give you a thick, tear-resistant blanket that's more like a tarp. You wear a heavy smock that you can't rip. A camera watches you 24/7. An officer checks on you every 15 minutes through a small window in the door. It's designed to keep you alive, but it makes you feel less than human. And that's when the rail break happened. I started talking to myself, not just thinking out loud. Full conversations. I'd ask questions and answer them in different voices. I'd recite Ophelia's lines like they were prayers. There's fennel for you and columbines. There's rue for you, and here's some for me. We may call it herb of grace. Oh, Sundays. Oh, you must wear your rue with a difference. The officers heard me. I saw them looking at each other through the window. Concerned. Scared, maybe. But I couldn't stop. It was like Ophelia herself was in the cell with me, teaching me her lines, preparing me for something I didn't understand yet. After 72 hours, they took me off Suicide Watch. Dr. Voss said I'd stabilized, but I hadn't. I'd just learned to perform stability. I went back to my regular cell. They gave me my Bible back, and the first thing I did was tear out more pages and make more flowers. This time, I didn't put them on the windowsill. I kept them hidden under my mattress. 11 flowers. 11 pieces of my breaking mind. Saturday night, November 2nd. I hadn't slept in 52 hours. The insomnia was so deep that I'd stopped feeling tired. I just felt electric, wired, like my nervous system was a live current with nowhere to ground. At 3:47 a.m., I stood up from my bunk. I walked to the metal sink in the corner of my cell, and I did something I'd been thinking about for days. I plugged the drain with a piece of torn fabric from my blanket, and I turned on the cold water. The sink filled slowly. I watched the water level rise. When it was full, almost to the brim, I turned off the faucet. The cell was silent, except for the hum of the fluorescent light in the corridor outside. I reached under my mattress and pulled out the 11 paper flowers I'd hidden. One by one, I placed them on the surface of the water. They floated. Some soaked through quickly and started to sink. Others stayed buoyant, spinning slowly in invisible currents. I stared at them, and I started whispering Ophelia's lines. There's rosemary, that's for remembrance. And there is pansies, that's for thoughts. I leaned over the sink. My face got closer and closer to the water. I could see my reflection, distorted, broken into pieces by the floating flowers. And then something impossible happened. My reflection changed. It wasn't my face anymore. It was a woman's face. Young, beautiful, pale, with flowers woven into her hair. Ophelia. She was staring back at me from the water, and her eyes were full of so much sadness that I felt my chest collapse. And behind her, in the reflection, I saw another figure, tall, made of light, not blinding, but warm, like the sun through closed eyelids. I blinked. Ophelia's face disappeared, but the figure of light remained. And then I heard it, not with my ears. I heard it in my chest, in my bones, in the part of me that I didn't even know still existed. A voice, deep, kind, unshakable. Sean, you don't have to drown to be reborn. I jerked my head up from the sink. My heart was slamming against my ribs. I spun around, and he was there, in my cell. Jesus. I know how that sounds. I know you might think I'd lost my mind completely, but listen to me. This wasn't a hallucination. This wasn't psychosis. There was a physical presence in that cell with me. I felt heat. I smelled something I can't describe, like myrrh mixed with ocean water. And I saw him, not in glowing robes like a painting. He was dressed simply, jeans, a white shirt, but his hands had marks. And when I looked closer, the marks weren't just scars. They were wet, like he'd been underwater too. He didn't speak right away. He walked slowly to the windowsill where I used to keep my flowers. He stopped, looked at the empty space, and then he turned to the sink where the 11 flowers were floating. He reached down, picked one up, a rose I'd folded from Psalm 23. The paper was soaked through, falling apart, and as he held it in his palm, it changed. The wet paper turned into a real flower, deep red petals, green stem, thorns. The smell of it filled the entire cell, so strong I thought I'd pass out. He looked at me and said, Ophelia died because no one saw her drowning in time. But I see you, Sean. I've always seen you. I fell to my knees, not because I decided to. My legs just gave out, and Jesus walked over to me, still holding that rose. He knelt down in front of me, so we were eye to eye, and he said, I'm going to show you 3 things. It will take 90 seconds. Don't look away. I nodded, even though I didn't understand. And then everything in the cell disappeared. The first vision hit me like a freight train. I was 19 years old, driving through Harlem in a beat-up Honda with $200 in my pocket and a head full of dreams. I was hungry, not just for food, hungry for life, for meaning, for purpose. I just dropped out of Howard, and everyone said I was insane. But I didn't care. I had something pure inside me then, something real. And Jesus' voice came through the vision. When did you stop being this man, Sean? When did you stop being hungry for purpose and start being hungry for power? When did you drown the real you and replace it with a character? I saw decades flash by. Every name change. Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, Diddy, Love. Each one a mask. Each one a layer further from a 19-year-old kid who just wanted to make music that mattered. I saw myself in boardrooms, on red carpets, at award shows, playing a part, performing Sean Combs instead of being him. And Jesus said, you drown in who you thought you needed to be. That was the first water, Sean. Ego. You've been underwater for 30 years and didn't even know it. The second vision was worse. I saw faces, hundreds of them, people I'd hurt, used, manipulated, stepped on, assistants I'd screamed at until they cried, artists whose contracts I'd structured to keep them dependent, women I'd silenced with NDAs and money. Every face was drowning, and I was the water. Jesus didn't sugarcoat it. Ophelia drowned alone, Sean, but you built an empire on drowning others. You called it ambition. You called it business. But look at what you really did. Look at the bodies you left submerged so you could float. I wanted to close my eyes. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. The vision held me there, forced me to see every person I convinced myself didn't matter. And the weight of it was so heavy I thought my chest would cave in. That was the second water. Sean. Power. You drown others to stay afloat. And now you're drowning in the weight of what you've done. The third vision broke me completely. I was 33 years old, peak of my success. Bad Boy Records was printing money. I was untouchable. and I was standing backstage at a church event I'd funded for my mother. She was on stage, praying over me in front of hundreds of people. Lord, don't let my son lose himself in this fame. Keep him close to you. Keep his heart soft. Don't let the world drown him. And I saw myself in that moment backstage, rolling my eyes, checking my phone, texting someone about a deal, completely disconnected from what she was saying, completely dismissive of her prayer. And Jesus whispered, "That day, you chose the world over me, and you've been drowning for 20 years since, Sean. Slow, quiet, elegant like Ophelia, but drowning all the same. That's the third water. Abandonment of God, and it's the deepest one." The vision stopped. I was back in the cell on my knees, sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. The kind of crying that rips through your entire body, that feels like it's pulling out pieces of your soul. I understood now. I understood why I'd been obsessed with Ophelia, why I'd made the flowers, why I'd filled the sink with water. I needed to live her fate, because it was the only metaphor powerful enough to describe what had happened to me. I'd been dead for years, dead in spirit, dead in purpose, dead in my relationship with God. The prison didn't kill me. It just made the death visible. Jesus placed a rose in my hand, the real one with thorns that pressed into my palm. And he said, "Ophelia died in the water, Sean, but you're going to be born in it. Tomorrow you'll be baptized. And the man I created when you were 19, the real Sean, is going to come back. But this time, he'll know that I am the source of everything. Not you, not your power, not your name. Me." And then he was gone. The cell was just a cell again. But the rose was still in my hand. Real, solid, thorns digging into my skin. I looked at the clock on the wall outside my cell. 3:49 a.m. 90 seconds. That's how long the whole thing took. 90 seconds that rewrote my entire life. I sat there until the sun came up. I didn't move. I just held that rose and cried. At 6 a.m., an officer came by for morning count. He looked through the window and stopped. He called out, "You okay in there, Combs?" I looked up at him. My face was swollen from crying. My eyes were bloodshot. But for the first time in months, I felt clear. I said, "Yeah, I'm okay. Better than I've been in years." He looked confused, but moved on. When he was gone, I looked down at my hand. The rose was still there, but it had dried overnight. The petals were brittle, the color darker, but it was real. I checked the sink. The paper flowers were gone. The water was still there, but the flowers had dissolved completely, like they'd never existed. But the rose in my hand was proof. Proof that Jesus had been there. Proof that I wasn't losing my mind. Proof that God enters prison cells at 3:47 in the morning and saves men who are seconds away from drowning forever. 3 days later, I filed a request with the chaplain's office. I wanted to be baptized. The prison chaplain, Pastor Michael Grove, came to my cell that afternoon. He was a skeptical man, 50s, gray beard, seen too many jailhouse conversions to be impressed easily. He sat down across from me in the small visitation room they use for pastoral meetings. He said, "Why now, Mr. Combs? I've been here for 6 weeks, and you haven't asked to see me once. Why the sudden interest in baptism?" I looked him in the eyes and told him the truth. I said, "Pastor, have you ever read Hamlet?" He blinked, surprised. He said, "Yeah, in college." "Why?" I said, "There's a character named Ophelia. She loses her father, gets rejected by the man she loves, goes insane, and drowns in a river surrounded by flowers. I've been living that story. For weeks, I've been Ophelia, mad, drowning, singing broken songs to myself. But 3 nights ago, Jesus came into my cell and told me I don't have to die like she did. He told me I can be reborn in the water instead of dying in it. So I need to be baptized, Pastor, not because I'm scared of hell, not because I want people to think I've changed, but because Jesus saved me from drowning, and I need to honor that publicly." Pastor Grove stared at me for a long time. Then he said, "You're serious?" I nodded. He said, "Okay, we'll do it Sunday." That Sunday, November 10th, I was baptized in the prison chapel. It's a small room, maybe 20 chairs, a wooden cross on the wall, and a portable baptismal tank. They were in for services. There were 11 other inmates there. Some came out of curiosity. Some came because they had nothing better to do. But when Pastor Grove asked me to step into that water, I felt the weight of everything. He said the words, "I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." And he pushed me backward into the water. I went under, and for a split second, I was back in that cell, leaning over the sink, staring at Ophelia's face in the reflection. But this time, when I came up out of the water, I wasn't gasping. I wasn't drowning. I was breathing. Fully, deeply, for the first time in decades. I felt like I could breathe. The inmates clapped. Some of them cried. Pastor Grove smiled, and I saw something in his face that told me he believed me. He believed that something real had happened. After the service, he pulled me aside and said, "Keep that rose safe, Sean. It's your Ebenezer stone, your reminder that God showed up when you needed him most." I told him I would, and I have. The rose is still with me. It's pressed between the pages of that Hamlet book, right at Act 4, Scene 7, Ophelia's death scene. Every morning, I open to that page and look at it, not as a prophecy of what could have been, but as a reminder of what Jesus stopped from happening. I was drowning, surrounded by flowers, singing broken songs, but he pulled me out. I'm still here, still in federal custody, still waiting for trial. I don't know what's going to happen legally. I don't know if I'll be convicted or acquitted. I don't know if I'll spend years here or walk out next month. But here's what I do know. I'm not drowning anymore. The water is still around me. The circumstances haven't changed. But I'm not sinking because Jesus is holding me up. And that's the difference between Ophelia and me. She drowned because no one saw her in time. But Jesus saw me. He's always seen me. And he pulled me out of the water before I went under for good. If you're watching this right now and you feel like you're living your own act 4, if you're isolated, if you're losing your mind, if you feel like you're drowning and no one can see it, I need you to hear this. Jesus sees you, just like he showed up in my cell at 3:47 in the morning. He can show up in the darkest moment of your life. You don't have to wait until you've completely submerged. Call his name right now, out loud, in your car, in your bedroom, in your prison cell, wherever you are. Call him, and I promise you he will answer. He will come, and he will pull you out of whatever water is trying to take you under. I don't expect everyone to believe this story. I don't expect everyone to understand why Ophelia mattered so much, or why the metaphor drowning is the only way I can describe what I went through. But if you've ever felt like you're performing a version of yourself that isn't real, if you've ever hurt people to build something and called it success, if you've ever ignored God's voice because you thought you didn't need it, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know what it feels like to drown slowly in a life that looks beautiful on the surface. And you know how terrifying it is when you finally realize you're underwater. But here's the hope. Jesus specializes in drowning men. He walked on water. He calmed storms. He pulled Peter out when he started sinking. And he pulled me out when I was seconds away from giving up completely. That's who he is. That's what he does. He saves people who are drowning. And if he did it for me, a man who spent decades building an empire on ego and power and control, he will do it for you. I want you to do 3 things after watching this. First, write in the comments, "I will not drown." Make it a public declaration. Say it out loud to the universe, to yourself, to God. I will not drown. Second, share this video with someone you know who's in the water right now. Don't wait until it's too late. Don't wait until you're at their funeral wishing you'd said something. Send it to them today. And third, subscribe to this channel. Because next week, I'm going to tell you about a man who died for 7 minutes after an overdose, saw hell, came back, and said something that made even atheists start praying. You're not going to want to miss it. This is my story. After I lived Ophelia's fate, I finally found Jesus. And if a man like me, who drowned in ego, power, and pride for 30 years, can be pulled out of water and reborn, then anyone can. Anyone, including you,